Okay, so today we're talking about solving equations. The steps I have listed here before you are basically a recipe for solving basically any type of equation that you'll come across. Okay, as you'll see in the video today, some of the steps that we use here aren't used for every single type of equation. Some of the steps we can eliminate right away. The idea here is to have this recipe of questions that we want to ask ourselves whenever we're solving an equation, and a specific order in which we want to do that to make our lives as simple as possible. So real quick, here are the steps that we have to solving equations. First of all, the first step is we want to simplify, and what I mean by simplify is here in the parentheses. Basically, if there are any exponents or fractions, and what I mean by fraction isn't that any little fraction that's there, we simplify. We want to look at fractions and see if they're going to cause a problem for us when we're solving the equation, and if they are, we want to get rid of that first before we do anything. And you'll see in the examples that I have for you here an example of a fraction that doesn't really cause us a problem from the beginning. So the first step is to simplify. The second step, we want to distribute. And what I mean by that word is we want to get rid of the parentheses. There is a property in math called the distributive property, and that is where we take what's outside of a parentheses and we'll distribute it to everything inside the parentheses by multiplying. The third step would be to combine any like terms. If you've got examples, would be like if you had 2x plus x minus 3 equal to 10. If you had an equation like that, 2x and x are like terms. We want to combine them. We want one of each type of term on either side of the equation before we start trying to move things across the equal sign. The fourth step, and this is the most common step here, is to add or subtract to get our variable alone. So before we deal with the variable and what's being multiplied by the variable, we want to get rid of the stuff that's being added or subtracted to it before we do that. And then the final step is to multiply or divide to solve. Okay, so these 5 steps will basically get you through 90% of the equations that you'll see in algebra if you just ask yourself these questions. So that being said, let's have a little look here at some examples. Now, these examples are very simple. They're 2-step equations, okay? There are much harder equations out there. That's not the purpose of this video. In subsequent videos, we will do harder equations with these steps. So looking at this first example, I have 3x minus 2 is equal to 4. So if I come back here for a minute to my little steps, I want to look for exponents or fractions that I could simplify. So if I'm looking here, I've got 3x minus 2 and 4. I don't have anything, so there's an example of a step that we don't have to use. So step 1 is something that doesn't apply to this equation, so we won't do it. Okay, coming back, the second step is to distribute. Get rid of parentheses. If you look at this equation, there are no parentheses in the equation, so we can dismiss that step as well. Third step is to combine like terms. So if we're looking at this one, we have 3x, we have negative 2, and then on the other side we have 4. So there are no like terms here to combine. You can say that negative 2 and 4 are like terms, but they're on opposite sides of the equal sign, so we can't combine them just yet. All right? And then the fourth step here would be to add or subtract to get the variable alone. Now this is the step that we can jump into with this equation. So whenever I'm looking at my equation, here's the variable x. That is what I want to get by itself. So I have a 3 times x, and then I have subtracting 2 from that. So when I say to add or subtract to get the variable alone, what I mean by that is let's get rid of this minus 2 before we deal with this positive 3. Okay? And now you could deal with the 3. You could divide everything by 3, but that's going to make your life more difficult because that's going to give you a fraction. We don't want to do that. So 95% of the time it's going to be easier to get rid of this minus or plus that's hanging out here before we deal with the 3 times x there. So let's do that. We've got a minus 2. Here is my equal sign. So this, again, if you think of it like a balance, we've got everything in balance right now. So when I add a plus 2 here on this side, plus 2, what I've just done is I've thrown that balance down, and I've got to put something over on this side to balance it back out. So I've added 2 here. To bring it back into balance, I've got to add 2 there. So now that I've added 2, what I'll do is I'll come through here and look at the little columns and add up and down from left to right. You know that 3x, we haven't done anything to it, so we'll bring it down. And now I've got minus 2 plus 2. That equals 0. So we could put plus 0 down here, but we don't really want to. That's just going to make it cluttered. So basically what we'll do is just scratch that off. And what's left on the other side is 4 plus 2. And that's going to be equal to 6. So now I've got 3x is equal to 6. What I want to do now is to do that last step, multiply or divide to solve. So this is that last step. So to undo a multiplication, I've got to divide. So I'm going to divide by 3. And again, what I do on one side of that equals, I got to do on the other. So I have to divide 3 on the other side. What this gives us on this side is 3 divided by 3 is 1. That makes it go away, and we're just left with 1x over here. Don't have to write the 1. And then on the other side, we do 6 divided by 3, which is going to be 2. And now I've accomplished my goal. I've got x alone on one side, and I've got the answer to it on the other side. So x equal to 2 is my answer to that equation. All right. So another example over here, negative y plus 6 is equal to negative 11. We'll run through these steps as quickly as we can. First of all, we want to simplify any exponents or fractions. Notice there are no exponents or fractions there, so we can skip that step. Second step would be to distribute. Are there any parentheses? No, we don't have to do that step. Third step, combine any like terms on either side of the equal sign. Notice these aren't like terms on this side, and there are no other terms over there besides that negative 11 on that side. So we can't even really do step 3. So now we're going to jump in at that step 4. We're going to add or subtract to get the variable by itself. So here I've got a plus 6. So if I want to get rid of the plus 6, what I have to do is subtract 6. And again, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we'll move that minus 6 over here. And then we'll add up and down in the columns. Notice this is a minus y. So we want to bring that minus sign down with it. I've got plus 6 minus 6. That goes to 0. That's equal to, now notice the signs are the same, so that means you add the numbers, 11 plus 6, 17. And then keep the sign of the bigger number, it's a negative 17. That's just some integer rules. And now we've got negative y equal to negative 17. So here's a little tricky thing here. We see that we've got our y sort of by itself. We might be tempted to think that we're done. But notice this negative sign here is hanging out with the y, and we can't just leave it as negative y. That's not the solution. We want the solution to y is equal to. So in order to get y by itself, what we have to do is we have to deal with this as if this were a negative 1 times y. Okay? Anytime you don't see a number with the variable, it's assumed that the number in front of the variable is 1 or negative 1. So in this case, it was minus 1. So to simplify that, basically, we're going to do what we did over here in this example. It's negative 1 times y. So to undo a times, we divide. So what you do to one side, you do to the other. So we divide by negative 1 over here as well. And then what you're left with here is y is equal to, notice negative divided by negative makes it a positive. Same thing over here. Negative divided by negative leaves us with a positive 17. Now notice, if you're lazy like me, this is a step that you can typically do in your head. When you get down to this point where you have negative y is equal to something, All you really have to do is change the sign of that something, and that is your answer. So if you want to be lazy and you don't want to show all your work, you can pretty much leave out this -1, but just know that that's what you had to do to get it by itself. All right? Now, down to these two examples here. First one, we've got m over 4 plus 2 is equal to 10. So in our remember in our little list of things to do, I said simplify, and over here I said exponents or fractions. But also remember that I said that not all fractions are going to create a problem for us. Technically, m over 4 here is a fraction, but it's not really something we have to get rid of right away because everything else is a nice whole number. So I only suggest that you get rid of fractions by multiplying through by whatever's on the bottom of the fraction if it's going to be a problem here with one of these numbers. Say if this were 2 over 4, you might want to go ahead and multiply everything through by 4 so that it's nice and neat and clean to work with. In this case, this fraction is not going to create any kind of problem for us until we get to the last step, so we're going to leave it alone. The second step is to distribute. There are no parentheses. Skip that. Combine like terms. Again, over here, this is one term, this is another. They're not alike, so we can't combine them. On this side, there's only one term, so we can skip that step. Step 4 is to add or subtract to get the variable alone. So we're going to come through just like we did up here in these examples. We're going to do the same thing right here. I've got a plus 2. To undo a plus 2, I want to subtract 2. And again, what I do on one side of the equals, I always have to do on the other. So I'll come over here and I'll subtract 2 there. And now up and down in columns. Now you have to think of this as one term. M over 4 is a unit that comes with itself. So m over 4, all of that's going to drop down as one big term. You can also think of this as the same thing as 1/4 times m, because that's what it is. Remember, no number in front of the variable means that there's a 1 there. But on to the next column, plus 2 minus 2, that goes away. So I'm left with equal to 10 minus 2 is equal to 8. All right? And then my final step here, this is step 5, where we multiply or divide to solve. Notice up here we had 3 times x, so we divided. Down here we've got m divided by 4, so the opposite of dividing is to multiply. So to get rid of that 4, we have to multiply 4. And again, what I do on one side, I have to do over here on the other. So I'm multiplying by 4 there as well. All right? So what happens here is that the 4 and the 4 will cancel, and I'm left with m is equal to 8 times 4 is going to be 32. And there is my answer. M is equal to 32. Finally, last example here, and I wanted to show you this one to show you that it doesn't matter what side of the equal sign the x is on. In these 3 examples, the x or m or whatever the letter was on the left side. Here it's on the right side. It doesn't matter. We're going to come over to this side. This is what we want to get by itself. And what's being done to it? Well, x is being divided by 9, so we're going to have to undo that. And it's also subtracting 15 from that whole term, so we're going to have to undo that as well. So running through the steps, simplify exponents or fractions. There are none. There's a fraction, but it's not going to cause a problem for us. Second step, distribute. There are no parentheses, so we'll leave it alone. Third step is to combine like terms. There are no like terms to combine here, so we'll jump in at step 4 yet again for add or subtract to get a variable alone. So I've got a minus 15. To undo that, I've got to add 15. What I do on one side, I have to do on the other. So I've got to come over here and add 15 there as well. So I've got 12 plus 15 is 27. And that's going to be equal to x over 9. And then these terms cancel out. So negative 15 plus 15 is 0. Finally, last step, multiply or divide to solve. I've got x divided by 9. When I've got x divided by 9, then I've got to multiply by 9 here to cancel that out. And what I do on one side, I do on the other. Okay? So here I've got 9 times 27. So if you don't have a calculator handy, sometimes these can be a little difficult. If you want to come over here and do it, in your head, 27 times 9, a little bit of third grade math for you. 9 times 7 is 63. 2 times 9 is 18. Plus 6 is 24. So my answer is 243. So here I've got 243 is equal to x. And again, notice just because the x is on the right side doesn't really mean anything, okay? This is my solution. I can leave it like that, or I can flip-flop it and say x is equal to 243. It doesn't matter. So there's some two-step examples. I hope it helps. Leave comments in the videos if you have any questions. Thank you.